As we move into the chapter 2 here, we're going to get into a little bit more about how verbal skills actually work and how we can make that verbal connection a little bit better than what we would normally do without thinking about it. So the first step in improving your verbal skills starts with just paying attention to what's being said to you, and most importantly, listening to yourself and the client or whoever's speaking to you, so that you're able to verbally engage into the conversation. And we're going to get into this a lot more, but understanding what you're about to respond to is the first key. Because a lot of people will throw something out there and says, well, yeah, I think maybe we ought to move some guys over here to do this. Then that's going to make it easier for this guy over here to do this. So what's the question being asked of you? You need to go in there and say, so are you saying to me that the question really is, can I move my men? And then you can kind of get the other party to start focusing in on what it is he's specifically asking you to do or what problem he wants you to solve. But if you just kind of go very nonchalantly and just continue to follow in his vein of thought, nobody knows who really said they were going to do one thing or another. You just all come up with somewhat of a plan and it just sort of falls into place. And this is the easiest way you can lose money, because all of a sudden 3 guys in the field decide, oh, this is a great idea. I'll just move 2 of my guys over here. You move 1 of your guys here and I'll do this. And the office doesn't know about it. And so they're all spending labor hours to do this. And then one day you go pull out your accounting information and find out you're losing you're losing a lot of money in one specific area, and lo and behold, it happens to be there. But you can't then go back and say, why is it you did this? Well, we kind of sat down and talked about it, and then nobody's going to remember what they talked about, because, as we've found to be true, is that people, even when they're attentive, they only absorb about half of what they hear. And these are proven facts. And after a week, guess what? If they can remember 20% of what they talked about in that meeting, you're doing really good. So it's real easy for this amnesia to get involved with it, and there's no way out of it other than you follow up these relationships in some form of writing or some form of documentation that says, yes, I am in fact going to do this based on our conversation of today. And all that is a very simple letter. And guess what? If all of a sudden the general contractor comes back and says, well, I don't know if I want to say that I directed you to do that. Well, you better get it out on the table now, because once you get the electricians in there, you're spending the money. So there are 2 ways in which this verbal connection occurs. And the most common is very instinctual. That's how we learn how to speak. And one person begins a conversation and you immediately follow suit by answering with a response. And that's just based on a real quick understanding of the matter being discussed. So when we look at the actual time that we do this, we have NECA, who's our big National Electrical Contractors Association, has studied the issue, or this issue, and finds that about 60 to 90% of all your supervisor time is spent in communication. And what's even more interesting is that the NECA data shows that 90% of the communication at the job site is verbal, meaning things are happening out there in which you have no way of establishing why they happened, when they happened, and for what reason they happened. So you can only imagine that's how people get into these large claims at the end of the job, which we have always been very good at avoiding, because once you are able to keep that communication, that 90% of communication on the job site, tied down to something that means something, or anything related to time and money, shall we say, at least you know what you committed to and how much that was, right? So with this set of facts, we can easily see how easy it is for a general contractor to verbally direct your work and then get away with it simply because there's no documentation in the project record. So, and the GC does this a lot. He says, man, you guys are behind and you need to move 10 guys up here to do this. And boy, you just say, okay, sir, I'll go do that. And you may argue with them for a little bit, but if you do eventually get into where you say, I'll give you 5 guys. Well, that's still 5 guys that you're not going to get paid for the time they have to remob and move their tools and get the materials in the right area. And you're not getting paid for any of that. And then when you come back and you say, oh, by the way, you owe me this much money for doing that for you, he's going to say, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I just told you to follow the schedule. And you weren't on the schedule. So I just, you did that on your own nickel, not mine. So we can see, and some jobs we've seen that are in trouble, that's generally where it happens, is right here, is all the verbal direction that's occurring on a job site that's not being documented. So once you understand that the verbal communication is a major driver of your work, you begin to see how easy it is for situations to occur that can cause you to do your work in a less than efficient manner. And at the same time, you don't have a way in which to get compensated for that less than efficient manner you're working in. And, for this reason alone, it's very important that you understand that verbal communication, has a major role in the success of your project, as well as making it very clear that if you're unable to document these conversations, you aren't going to stand much of a chance in which to recoup any losses that you may have had as a result of this verbal direction. And so much of this verbal direction is happening in the field. And as project engineers, it's our job to be out and understanding why our people are where they are, and they're doing what we ask them to do, and it's in accordance with a schedule of some sort. So you can see how important verbal skills there's a hard skill to it, meaning that if you're verbally communicating with somebody in a meeting, at least there's going to be meeting minutes. And you want to make sure that you got it documented correctly in those minutes. So the more meetings you have, the better off you are. So, and it's the impromptu meetings that are out on the field that really are the ones that you have to figure out how you're going to document that stuff. And all you really need to do is say, all right, in your notebook, write down what what that meeting was, when it happened, who was there, in just a notebook, and keep a log of everything that was said. Yeah, we agreed to do this, and he agreed to do that, and he agreed to do that, because at least we have something that is handwritten from that person that was there at that conversation. And that has a lot of credibility in a court of law or in any kind of dispute before you even consider bringing lawyers in. Because if I can go up and show the general contractor and the owner, look, this is what happened, and here's the conversations we had, and here's what we did, then I have a much better opportunity of being credible, first of all, and secondly, being able to prove that the losses that I experienced were related to this one issue. But if I don't have anything, I'm done. So you have really 2 choices when it comes to your verbal skills, is that you either write it down in your little daily journal of every conversation you have like that, or you actually do a confirming email to the people and say, confirming our conversation of today, we are going to do the following. And then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, bing, you've got it. And if there is an objection, you'll know it very quickly if you send the email. And this is a relationship that we all hate to have happen, but we're trying to build relationships with our clients. And we don't want it to be like, oh, I don't trust you, so I got to document everything. So there's that fine line of how well you can document things without it affecting your relationship. And so it's very, and that's going to get into the soft skills. When we talk into the individual assignment, we'll get a little bit more into that. But it is a major key factor that you always need to think about it in the way that we normally make the mistake of not documenting. So, to make the mistake of over documenting is really, in a way, a trend that's better than the other way around, because we know what happens if you don't document it. You will lose money and you won't have a way to get it collected. So when we go back and look at this interaction, we can easily see the connection of two parties is based on a subject that has two different points of understanding. And there are two ways in which this verbal connection occurs. Most common is instinctual. Basically, one person starts and then you follow suit, and then you all come up with a response based on your understanding, and that's it. Interestingly, though, in this scenario, you've not thought about your response before you make it, but instead you're just immediately communicating what's at the top of your mind at that moment. And I've got to tell you that while you think your mind is a great thing and it's got all the right answers, just that 1 to 2 seconds of sitting back and thinking about it for a moment is not a bad thing to do. And it's really listening to yourself at that point. So not only do we have to listen to the client that's asking us to do things in this connection, this verbal connection, we have to ask ourselves, what is it we want to do? And what is the best possible solution for the company we work for? So the basic element of this impromptu form of communication that is based on responding to questions, problems, or solutions at a very base level that's not really founded on a thoughtful response, but more so comes from your general understanding of your subjects and your first thoughts concerning that issue. Now, we're going to recommend that you use a second approach. And that really is you don't have to be the first guy out to say something. And the second approach just simply requires a slight pause when somebody asks you or presents the issue. Just take a pause for a second or two, and in that listening process, you formulate the question that's being asked of you. And if you can't formulate the question, make sure you get the guy to define what it is he's asking you to do. And then you make sure that you understand what it is you're about to respond to. Because I've seen a lot of guys, they think they're responding to one thing, but it gets misconstrued to be something completely different because the question wasn't posed correctly, or the question was so broad that all of a sudden you thought you were doing it for just one specific thing, but it now affects everything on the job. So you got to really think about that. And just by taking that slight pause and asking yourself, do I really know what this guy wants me to respond to and what he's really asking? Or do I need to ask some more questions to make sure I understand what I'm about to respond to? And in the process of thinking about the discussion that has been passed to you, the important aspect is to clarify the subject which you're about to discuss so that all parties can understand your response in the context of a defined subject of discussion. And it's really quite simple. You just say, now, Joe, you asked me to do this for these 10 guys. Is this going to apply to, is this strictly for this one part of the building? Or are you thinking we may have to do this for the entire building? And, and at that point, he's either going to answer you one way or the other. So that clarifies that answer. And then are you saying that you want me to do this for a period of a day or two? Or are we talking from this point forward till the job's done? So now you get a time element. How long is the commitment that you're about to make? And when you think about it, by asking a few questions and clarifying the parameters that you're about to respond to, you've established a framework so that your response can be properly understood and then document it for the project record. So then you have a question and an answer, and you can say, at that point, you can email saying, after our discussion, and we have the following recommendations, and boom, 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 and you get it into the project record in the form of either a memo or a meeting note or a hand scratched into your journal. You know, there's many different layers that you can do that. Obviously, the higher the risk or the less comfortable you are with the situation you're getting into, the more you want to document it. So, in a lot of times, I've used job journals for the little stuff. Oh, yeah, sure, I understand. You need some temporary up there. Let me go get it done. You just write it down in your deal. Talk to Bill, you know, put the time you talked to him, and then said, move 5 guys over here to get that temporary installed or something like that. Now, that one's not a high-risk deal, but because you have an allowance for temporary and you understand that. But then another deal may be, you know, I need to add another 400 amp disconnect up on the 15th floor because they're going to bring in a bunch of welders, and you know your temporary budget can't handle it. You may want to write an email on that and saying, you know, you have hereby directed us to do this. You know, please issue a change order to increase the allowance for the temporary by this much, right? So either way, you just look at it based on the risk. And as you become more and more experienced, you're going to get a better feel for how risk works and how well you can manage that risk. And that's really what will take you into project management is once you get to be a project manager, your whole job is about managing risk. So by learning this is the first step into project management, to be perfectly honest with you. So, so basically that's what we're trying to say here with verbal skills. You really want to clarify, understand what it is, properly frame your verbal conversations, and we'll do this a lot more in the individual assignment, but then also recognize that the hard skill is getting it documented into the project record in some form or another. And, you know, so with that said, we'll go ahead and move on to Chapter 3. And Chapter 3 is just going to walk you through the classroom materials that are there for you guys to get kind of understand this whole broad subject a little bit better. So let's move on to Chapter 3.